Hello, dear viewers. Today we're going to be talking about the United States and what its interests are in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Let's begin. Well, it's now 1 year since the special military operation launched by Vladimir Putin. What's happened so far is that the US has placed sanctions on Russia, so have other European countries, and the US has also given military aid and other forms of aid to Ukraine. This month, Joe Biden visited Ukraine in a surprise visit and gave uh, more financial aid to Ukraine. And this is at a time when many Americans are having several financial problems. And quite frankly, the support for the war, especially among Republican voters, is reducing. And so it's made me wonder what interests the US has in this war. Why is it so important for the US to be supporting Ukraine? What will happen to the US if Ukraine loses or if Russia loses? Whichever way this goes, how will the United States be hurt or benefited? That should be the number one reason for them to be involved in the conflict, isn't it? That's again what a nationalist like me would be interested in. But let's see if the current president and the rest of his administration are American nationalists or just globalists. So let's go back in time to February 24th, 2022. This was the day when Russia attacked and began its invasion of Ukraine. And these were Biden's first remarks. Uh, just want to point out how he was late, says sorry to keep you waiting. Kind of typical of Biden to get late to whatever he needs to do, isn't it? Anyway, uh, he says the Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine without provocation, without justification, without necessity. I've spoken about the Ukraine conflict in previous videos. I've given what Russia's justifications are for the conflict, for its actions, and I'll give a link to that video on the screen. You can click it to see what my positions are on whether Russia's has justification for its actions. If you don't want to see the full video, a short form would be that I do have believe that Russia is somewhat justified. I think that they don't did not have any other option except to attack Ukraine. But personally, I still feel that they could have done something else. They could have tried a different, more diplomacy, maybe economic actions. But in reality, I don't think that they had an option. So, yeah, I disagree with this assessment by Biden. He talks about Russia's plans and cyber attacks against Ukraine. So Putin is the aggressor. And yeah, so here throughout all this, he doesn't talk about how this is going to affect the US and how the US will suffer from this invasion. Nothing. Uh, he talks about the NATO alliance, which I understand that America has uh, allies to that it needs to support. And so if Russia were to attack a NATO country, which I hope never happens, then America will respond, just like rest of NATO. Article 5 will come into fruition. Hopefully, again, like I said, I hope it never happens. But in this case, Ukraine is not a NATO ally, so US doesn't have to get involved. There's no legal obligation. Yeah. So that's the very first remarks. He can't justify why America has to be involved. He says Russia. Then this is later in September when Russia annexed Ukrainian territory, the Donbass and the Donetsk regions. Uh, the United States condemns Russia's fraudulent attempts today to annex sovereign Ukrainian territory. Russia is violating international law, trampling over the United Nations Charter, and showing its contempt for peaceful nations everywhere. Make no mistake, these actions have no legitimacy. The United States will always honor Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. We will continue to support Ukraine's efforts, yada, yada, yada. So, here again, we can see that somehow the US has taken it upon itself to enforce the United Nations Charter. Now, as far as I know, I'm not a international relations expert or though I have studied international law, and what I know is that the Security Council can impose sanctions under Article 41. Sanctions measures uh, they encompass a broad range of enforcement options that do not involve the use of armed force. And since 1966, the Security Council has established 30 sanctions regimes in southern Rhodesia, South Africa, the former Yugoslavia, Haiti, Iraq, Angola, Rwanda, Libya, Iran, etc. So the UN can issue sanctions. It's not necessary for the US to do it. And since the US wasn't itself affected by Russia's actions, it should not have imposed sanctions on Russia. That was, again, the job of enforcing international law lies with the United Nations, and it should have been the one to impose sanctions. It did not, and it should have been left at that. The world would be much better, economically speaking, if the US did not impose such wide ranging sanctions against Russia. The oil markets would be stronger, the prices would be lower, there'd be fertilizers would also be available, and the food uh, supplies around the world would be better, and things would have been better, including for America. American people have had price inflation, and Biden himself has blamed this on Russia, which is kind of funny. It's not Russia that did anything to cause America's oil prices to rise. It was the sanctions imposed by the United States that have caused price rises in fossil fuels, which have led to inflation in the US that the United States citizens are suffering from. In other words, it's Biden's own fault that they are suffering such. So, yeah, neither does the UN, the US have the authority to uh, enforce international law, and neither was it threatened by Russia's actions. So it had no reason to get involved in this conflict. I know what you're thinking after seeing this video. My God, this guy must be paid by Russia. He must be a Putin agent or something. Just so you know, Russia is not so bankrupt that they have to hire me as a propagandist. If the day that happens, it would mean that Russia is in a worse financial situation they were in the 90s. So you can rest easy on that. And I'm not getting paid by anybody. These are my own opinions. If you disagree, go at me in the comment section, but don't accuse me of being bought out by somebody. Come up with actual criticism rather than allegations. The real reason I'm talking about this is because I was inspired by the Rage Against the War Machine rally that took place last weekend, where people from the People's Party of the US and the Libertarian Party organized a protest and a rally against the US's involvement in this war. And now, I'm personally not some hippie. I'm not completely anti war or pro peace like how they were in the 60s, and these people are not like that. I'm not a pacifist. I think that a country should and has the right to use military force to defend itself and its interests. And if my country were attacked, I would want it to use military force to protect itself. But I am against using the military and even economic force just to satisfy the interests of companies or politicians or NGOs or any other organizations just to help them financially when it doesn't help the country. And so, unfortunately, that's what the US is doing in Ukraine. Uh, you can watch this documentary by Oliver Stone called Ukraine on Fire, where he talks and explains how the US, through uh, organizations like the Endowment for Democracy, supports color revolutions in countries that are ruled by governments that don't obey America, and they created a color revolution in the Ukraine in 2013 and removed the then government from power and imposed a unlawfully imposed a pro-America, pro-West president on Ukraine. And yeah, basically they're just doing this for some financial gains. Anyway, so yeah, the fact that the left and the right in America, I should have used opposite hands, shouldn't I? Anyway, the fact that the left and the right in America have united to oppose this war gives me great hope. Hopefully, the populists in both sides can work together to put pressure on the government to stop funding Ukraine, to stop giving billions of dollars to them, to stop sending military weapons, and to not support Ukraine if it invades Crimea, of all places. And because this is becoming very serious, there is now actually a possibility that nuclear weapons might be used. Russia has said this. So has the UK. The previous UK Prime Minister Liz Truss did say this last year that the UK is will use nuclear weapons, not in offense, but against in defense, but which is the same thing that Russia has said. So nuclear weapons are on the table. So this whole situation needs to be calmed down. The US and the West have to ideally leave Ukraine and allow Ukraine and Russia to settle their differences themselves. Sadly, that is not going to happen. And but I think if the US public and in the public in other Western countries can start actual protest movement, their governments to really pressurize them against supporting this war, then maybe their governments will back down from it. Otherwise, without massive protests, massive pressure from the people, I don't see uh, these governments pursuing peace in this conflict. And also the fact, what really sold me on this uh, movement, this rally, the authenticity of it was the presence of several really good influencers and political commentators like Jackson Hinkle, Jimmy Dore, and the man, the myth, the legend himself, Ron Paul, who is who is actually the main reason why I identify today as a libertarian. Been fighting for peace throughout his entire political career. Even today, at when he's in his late 80s, is remarkable, and I find him to be an inspiration. So yeah, I hope that you can see now that the United States is led by a globalist cabal and that their government is not working in their national interests. It is not a nationalistic government. And I hope that it can be pressured to change its ways, or if not, but ultimately, I don't think the situation is going to get better. I think the best hope would be for Trump to return. Not only the US, but the entire world needs Trump again in 2024. Please give your feedback in the comments section. If you want to see other videos about nationalism in countries outside South Asia, click on this playlist. If you want to see my previous video, click here. If you want to see the sources I use for this video, click the links in the description below. Thank you for watching. Vande Mataram.